If you've been wronged, listen to this story. In the heart of a bustling forest, where sunlight danced through the leaves and a symphony of chirping birds filled the air, lay the home of a thriving ant colony. This colony was a marvel of teamwork, a labyrinth of chambers bustling with activity. Among its countless inhabitants was Kira, a young worker ant with a distinct spark in her tiny black eyes. Unlike the others, who moved with mechanical precision, Kira often found herself pausing to observe the world around her. She marveled at the way raindrops glittered on blades of grass and how the sun warmed the earth after a storm. But what set her apart most was her heart. Kira's compassion knew no bounds. She would carry extra crumbs to an older ant struggling to climb or stop, to comfort a frightened larva lost in the maze of tunnels. Despite her kind nature, Kira's actions were met with little appreciation. To the colony, survival was paramount, and any delay in work was frowned upon. The leaders, stern and pragmatic, often scolded Kira for wasting time on tasks that didn't directly contribute to the stockpiles of food or the fortification of their home. "Kira," the elder worker once sighed, "you must learn that kindness doesn't build walls or fill storage chambers." Though the words stung, Kira couldn't suppress her instincts. She believed that every life in the colony mattered, even if her actions went unnoticed. Day after day, she continued her quiet acts of generosity, finding small ways to bring comfort to those who needed it most. The forest outside, however, was an unpredictable force. Storms loomed on the horizon, and whispers of impending danger stirred unease in the colony. Food supplies were running low, and the workers were ordered to double their efforts to secure resources. Kira, though willing to contribute, couldn't ignore the cries of ants injured in recent accidents, or the struggles of weaker members left behind in the frenzy. In a world where efficiency reigned supreme, Kira's heart often felt out of place, but deep inside, she clung to the belief that kindness was never wasted. Even as the colony rushed ahead, Kira carried her conviction, unaware that her path was about to diverge from the orderly march of her peers, and that her compassion would soon be tested in ways she could never imagine. The storm had finally passed, leaving the forest damp and alive with the sense of wet earth and foliage. The colony, however, was far from calm. The tempest had washed away food trails and collapsed storage chambers, leaving many ants injured and supplies perilously low. The leaders convened an emergency meeting, issuing orders that every able-bodied worker must focus on rebuilding and foraging. Efficiency was paramount. Kira listened to the directives, her heart heavy. As the other ants marched out in perfectly synchronized lines to search for food, she noticed a group of injured ants struggling to move deeper into the safety of the tunnels. One older ant, his leg twisted from the storm's chaos, winced with every step. Kira paused, instinct pulling her toward him. "Kira, no!" barked a soldier ant guarding the exit. "There's no time for distractions. Follow the line and do your part." Kira hesitated. The words of the elder worker echoed in her mind. Kindness doesn't build walls. But the sight of the struggling ant gnawed at her resolve. Quietly, she slipped away from the group, taking a longer route to avoid attention. She gathered small leaves and bits of moss to create a makeshift sling for the injured ant. "Hold on," she whispered, guiding him carefully toward a safe chamber. News of Kira's actions spread quickly. While a few ants murmured appreciation, the majority saw her as reckless. "She's ignoring orders," they said. "Her softness will be the ruin of us all." The colony was already stretched thin, and any deviation from the plan was viewed as a threat to their survival. The tension grew heavier when another storm clouded the sky. Kira, returning from helping an injured group, overheard a heated discussion among the leaders. "We cannot afford these distractions," the head leader snapped. "Anyone who disrupts the colony's focus must face consequences." Kira lowered her gaze. a pang of doubt piercing her heart. Was she truly causing harm by following her instincts? She glanced toward the tunnel where the injured ants rested, their soft murmurs of gratitude still fresh in her memory. It was a fragile balance, the survival of the colony versus the individual lives within it. The storm broke, lightning tearing across the sky and thunder shaking the earth. As Kira ventured out with the foraging group, the leader's words still weighed on her. She tried to focus, but the cries of a small voice stopped her in her tracks. Deep in the underbrush, a young caterpillar was tangled in a spider's silk, its desperate movements drawing predators closer. Kira hesitated, torn between duty and compassion. The voices of her peers grew fainter as they marched ahead. With a deep breath, she turned toward the sound of the struggling creature. "Hang on," she called softly, rushing to free it. Unbeknownst to Kira, her choice would lead her far from the safety of the colony, setting her on a path that would challenge everything she believed about kindness and its consequences. The forest loomed darker as Kira worked tirelessly to free the young caterpillar from its silken trap. She ignored the rumble of thunder and the flicker of lightning above, her tiny legs moving with careful precision. "You're almost free," she whispered as the last strands of silk snapped under her mandibles. "Thank you," the caterpillar murmured weakly, its voice trembling with exhaustion, but the moment of relief was short-lived. The forest floor shook as a sudden gust of wind tore through the underbrush. A shadow fell over them both, a predator drawn by the commotion. It was a bird, its beady eyes locking onto Kira and her newfound companion. The caterpillar froze, but Kira pushed it toward a clump of leaves. "Hide there!" she hissed before darting in the opposite direction, hoping to distract the predator. Her heart pounded as the bird swooped low, its talons slicing through the air perilously close. Kira's tiny legs carried her faster than she thought possible, weaving through twigs and roots. But the bird was relentless, its sharp cries cutting through the storm's roar. Just as she thought she'd outrun it, Kira misstepped, her foot catching on a stray vine. She tumbled, landing hard against a jagged stone. Pain shot through her side as she tried to move, but her legs trembled under her weight. The bird descended, its wings stirring the air into a vortex around her. Kira braced for the inevitable, her mind racing through a whirlwind of regrets. Would the caterpillar survive? Had her choices truly caused harm to her colony? But the final blow never came. Instead, the bird let out a startled screech and veered away, its wings flapping frantically as it retreated into the stormy sky. Kira blinked, dazed, and looked up to see a towering figure. A stag beetle, its massive pincers gleaming even in the dim light. "Are you all right?" the beetle asked, his deep voice resonating over the sound of rain. Kira nodded weakly, still unable to find her footing. "That was brave," the beetle continued, "but foolish. The forest is no place for the soft-hearted." Kira winced at his words, but before she could respond, the beetle gestured toward a hollow log nearby. "Come rest there until the storm passes, It's not safe out here." With effort, Kira dragged herself to the log. She was drenched and aching, but the sting of the beetle's remark lingered more than her physical wounds. Was her compassion truly a weakness, as everyone seemed to believe? The storm raged on, and Kira's thoughts grew darker with each passing moment. She was far from her colony, unsure of how to return, and painfully aware that her absence might confirm the doubts her leaders had voiced. Yet she couldn't shake the image of the caterpillar's relieved expression. As the rain hammered against the log's surface, Kira realized she had reached a breaking point. Her kindness had always been her compass, but now it felt like a weight dragging her down. Was it worth holding on to, or was it time to accept that survival required something harder, colder? Little did Kira know, the answers to her questions would come sooner than she expected, in the form of an encounter that would change her understanding of strength and compassion forever. The storm subsided, with the first light of dawn, leaving the forest heavy with mist and the lingering scent of rain. Kira emerged cautiously from the hollow log, her body aching with every step. Her mind swirled with doubt, the beetle's words replaying in her head. The forest is no place for the soft-hearted. Determined to find her way back to the colony, Kira began her journey through the maze of roots and leaves. But the forest, quiet now, felt vast and unfamiliar. Every sound, from the rustle of branches to the chirp of distant insects, seemed amplified in her solitude. The knowledge that she was alone for the first time in her life weighed heavily on her. Hours passed as she navigated the damp undergrowth. Hunger gnawed at her, and her injured leg throbbed with each step. Yet she pressed on, driven by a fragile hope of returning to her colony. As she climbed over a mossy rock, a sharp cry broke the stillness. Kira froze, her antennae twitching as she scanned her surroundings. The sound came again, faint but desperate. She followed it cautiously, her heart pounding. Pushing through a patch of ferns, she came upon a shocking scene, a fire ant trapped beneath a heavy shard of bark. The fire ant's vibrant red exoskeleton glistened with sweat as it struggled to free itself. Its mandibles clacked in frustration, and its movements were growing weaker. Kira hesitated. Fire ants were notorious for their aggression, often seen as bullies in the insect world. Helping one could mean trouble. "Leave me!" the fire ant growled, its tone both defiant and resigned. "I don't need your pity." Kira's first instinct was to turn away. Surely this wasn't her problem. But as she watched the fire ant's strength ebb, a familiar feeling stirred in her chest. She couldn't ignore another creature in need, regardless of their reputation. Against her better judgment, Kira approached. "Stay still," she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. Using all her strength, she began to push against the shard of bark. It barely budged. Gritting her mandibles, she tried again, her injured leg trembling under the strain. The fire ant watched silently, its eyes narrowing in disbelief. "Why are you helping me?" it finally asked, its voice tinged with suspicion. "Because you need it," Kira replied, her tone simple but resolute. With a final shove, the bark shifted, and the fire ant crawled free, its movement slow and unsteady. For a moment, the two ants stood in silence. The fire ant, clearly unused to such gestures, seemed unsure of what to say. "I didn't ask for your help," it muttered, but its tone had softened. Kira offered a faint smile. "You didn't have to." Before she could say more, a shadow passed overhead. Both ants turned their gaze upward to see a large spider descending from the canopy, its long legs moving with eerie precision. Kira's heart raced, but the fire ant stepped forward, mandibles flaring. "Stay behind me," it growled. Kira watched in astonishment as the fire ant faced the predator, its small frame radiating defiance. For the first time, Kira saw strength in an unexpected form, one born not of brute force, but of loyalty and instinct. As the spider advanced, Kira knew the moment of reckoning was upon them. She would have to summon every ounce of courage she had to fight alongside her unlikely ally, setting aside her doubts to prove that kindness was not a weakness, but a strength. The spider loomed above them, its 8 eyes glinting like black beads. Each step of its long legs sent tremors through the ground, and its fangs gleamed with venom. Kira's heart raced as she braced herself for the inevitable attack. Beside her, the fire ant stood firm, its mandibles clicking with determination. "Keep moving when I say," the fire ant hissed. "We don't stand a chance if we stay in one spot." Kira swallowed her fear and nodded. The spider lunged, its shadow enveloping them. Kira dodged to the left, while the fire ant darted forward, biting fiercely at one of the spider's legs. The predator recoiled momentarily, its hiss cutting through the still air. "Keep going!" the fire ant shouted. Kira darted around the spider, searching for an opening. Her small size allowed her to slip under its abdomen unnoticed. She spotted a weak point where its legs joined its body and acted instinctively, biting down with all her strength. The spider let out a screech, thrashing wildly. The fire ant seized the moment, attacking again and again, each strike precise and relentless. Kira felt a surge of courage watching her unexpected ally fight with such ferocity. She pushed herself to keep up, working in tandem despite the odds stacked against them. Finally, the spider let out a final, frustrated cry and retreated into the shadows of the trees. Exhausted but triumphant, Kira and the fire ant collapsed onto the damp forest floor. The tension between them, once palpable, began to dissolve in the shared relief of survival. The fire ant glanced at Kira, its antennae twitching uncertainly. "You're not like the others," it said after a long pause. Kira tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "You could have left me there," the fire ant replied, its tone softer than before. "Most wouldn't have thought twice, and yet you stayed." Kira offered a faint smile. "I've always believed that kindness is worth the risk, even if others don't see it that way." The fire ant studied her, its mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Kindness," it repeated, as if the word were foreign. "It's not something I've known much of." Before Kira could respond, a new voice broke the silence. "And yet, it is what saved you both." They turned to see a butterfly descending gracefully from a nearby branch. Its wings shimmered with iridescent colors, catching the faint rays of sunlight filtering through the canopy. Kira's breath caught as the butterfly landed delicately before them. "I've watched you both," the butterfly said, its voice calm and melodic. "Your courage is admirable, but it was your compassion, Kira, that set this chain of events in motion." The fire ant shifted uncomfortably. "I wouldn't call it compassion. She's just stubborn." The butterfly chuckled softly. "Call it what you will, but kindness has power, more than strength or cunning alone. Kira, your actions may seem small, but they ripple outward, touching lives in ways you cannot yet see." Kira felt a warmth bloom in her chest. For the first time in days, her doubts began to fade. The butterfly's words resonated deeply, rekindling the belief she'd carried for so long. "And you," the butterfly continued, addressing the fire ant, "have learned that strength can be shared. Together, you both embody a balance the forest sorely needs." The fire ant looked away, its antennae twitching awkwardly. "Maybe," it muttered, though a hint of respect shone in its gaze. The butterfly spread its radiant wings. "Your journey is far from over, but remember this: true power lies in the bonds we form. Kindness is never wasted, even in the most unforgiving of places." With that, the butterfly took flight, leaving Kira and the fire ant alone once more. For a moment, they sat in silence, the gravity of the encounter settling over them. Finally, the fire ant stood. "Come on," it said gruffly. "You've got a colony to get back to." Kira rose, her heart lighter than it had been in days. With an unexpected ally by her side and new wisdom guiding her steps, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The forest had transformed under the glow of the afternoon sun. The storm's destruction was still evident, fallen branches and flooded trails, but the air was now filled with the sense of fresh growth and damp earth. Kira moved steadily through the underbrush, her injured leg still aching, but her resolve stronger than ever. Beside her, the fire ant matched her pace, silent but ever watchful. As they journeyed, the tension between them began to thaw. The fire ant, once gruff and dismissive, occasionally offered quiet words of advice. "Stay low," it muttered when a bird's shadow passed overhead. "Take this path, it's safer," it added when the ground became treacherous. Though their alliance was born of necessity, Kira began to sense a growing trust. After hours of travel, they reached a steep incline bordered by thick roots. Beyond it lay the familiar sense of Kira's colony. Her heart leapt at the thought of returning, but the fire ant halted abruptly. "This is where I turn back," it said, its voice gruff but tinged with hesitation. Kira turned to face it, surprise flickering in her expression. "You're not coming with me?" The fire ant shook its head. "Your colony wouldn't welcome me. They'd see me as a threat." Kira frowned. "They might, but I wouldn't let anything happen to you. After everything we've been through, you've more than proven yourself." The fire ant hesitated, its antennae twitching as if wrestling with the unfamiliar weight of gratitude. Finally, it spoke. "You've changed the way I see things, Kira. Maybe kindness isn't weakness after all, but this is your journey to finish." Before Kira could protest, the fire ant stepped closer, its gaze steady. "Go! Show them what you've learned. And if you ever need an ally, look for me in the western thicket." Kira felt a lump rise in her throat. "Thank you," she said softly. With a brief nod, the fire ant turned and disappeared into the shadows. Kira stood there for a moment, her heart heavy yet full. She took a deep breath and climbed the incline, each step carrying her closer to home. When she finally reached the outskirts of the colony, the scene was both familiar and different. Ants rushed back and forth, their movements precise and efficient as always, but the air buzzed with tension. It seemed the leader's fears had deepened in her absence. "Kira!" a voice called out, sharp with disbelief. She turned to see one of the elder workers, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and exasperation. "You've been gone for days. We thought you were lost, or worse." Before Kira could respond, the elder's expression hardened. "And look at you, limping, covered in dirt. What have you been doing while the rest of us worked to rebuild?" Kira's heart sank, but she stood her ground. "I've been learning," she said firmly. "And I've brought something back, something this colony desperately needs." The elder worker scoffed. "And what might that be?" "Perspective," Kira replied, her voice steady. "We've spent so long focused on efficiency that we've forgotten what truly holds us together. It's not just strength or strategy, it's the willingness to care for one another, no matter the cost." A murmur spread through the gathered ants. The leaders approached, their expressions skeptical but curious. Kira took a deep breath and continued. "In my time away, I've faced challenges I never thought I could overcome. And I didn't do it alone. I found help in the unlikeliest of places, and it reminded me that kindness is a force more powerful than fear or strength." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Some ants exchanged thoughtful glances, others looked uncertain. But before anyone could speak, a small voice piped up from the crowd. "She helped me once," said a frail worker ant, stepping forward. "When I couldn't carry my load, Kira carried it for me. Without her, I wouldn't be here." Another voice followed. "And me. When I was injured, she made sure I reached safety." The murmurs grew louder as more ants came forward, each recounting small but meaningful acts of kindness Kira had shown them. The elder workers' stern expressions softened, and the leaders exchanged hesitant nods. "Perhaps," one said cautiously, "there's more to survival than we've allowed ourselves to see." Kira's chest swelled with hope. The colony wasn't transformed yet, but a door had been opened, and with that, she knew her journey was far from over. The days that followed Kira's return were a whirlwind of change and reflection. Though her initial reception had been met with skepticism, the stories of her quiet acts of kindness spread quickly through the colony. Ants who once dismissed her as soft or foolish began to see her in a new light. The leaders, traditionally stern and unwavering, held a meeting to discuss Kira's experiences and her suggestion that compassion could strengthen the colony in ways they hadn't considered. For the first time, they invited every member of the colony to share their thoughts. The gathering was unprecedented. Ants of all castes, workers, soldiers, even the frailest elders, assembled in the central chamber. Kira stood before them, nervous but resolute. She spoke of her journey, of the challenges she faced, and of the fire ant who had fought beside her. She recounted the butterfly's wisdom, its reminder that kindness could ripple outward, creating bonds stronger than fear or force. At first, the room was silent, the weight of her words settling over the crowd. Then, one by one, ants began to speak. "I used to think strength was all that mattered," said a soldier ant, his voice hesitant. "But maybe strength means more than carrying a heavy load. Maybe it's about carrying each other when it counts." "I always thought helping others would slow us down," added a worker ant. "But Kira showed me that it can make us faster together." The elder leader, who had once scolded Kira for her wasted time, stepped forward. Her eyes, usually sharp, now glimmered with something softer. "We've endured many hardships," she began, her voice steady but warm. "And it's true, survival demands strength and efficiency. But Kira has reminded us of something we've long neglected, that unity, fueled by kindness, is the heart of any true strength." A ripple of agreement swept through the chamber. For the first time in memory, the colony felt not just like a machine of survival, but a community of individuals bound by shared purpose and care. From that day, small but significant changes took root. Ants began to check on one another more often, offering help without hesitation. Injured or weaker members, once sidelined, found themselves supported by the group. Even the leaders began to reconsider their approach, balancing strategy with empathy. Kira's role in the colony transformed as well. Though she continued her duties as a worker, she became an unofficial mentor, sharing her story with younger ants and teaching them that kindness wasn't a weakness, but a strength that could change lives. Her reputation extended beyond the colony. Travelers from neighboring nests brought tales of a worker ant who had faced predators and storms with a heart full of compassion. Some came seeking advice, others came simply to see the ant who had made kindness a cornerstone of survival. One afternoon, as Kira rested near the edge of the colony, a familiar figure emerged from the underbrush. The fire ant. It approached hesitantly, its mandibles clicking in an almost bashful rhythm. "You've been busy," it said, gesturing toward the bustling colony. Kira smiled warmly. "I couldn't have done it without you." The fire ant scoffed but didn't argue. Instead, it looked around, its gaze softening. "It's different here, feels less cold." "It is," Kira agreed, "and it can be everywhere if we let it." The fire ant tilted its head, considering her words. "You're a stubborn one, Kira, but maybe stubbornness isn't so bad when it's for something good." As the fire ant departed once more, Kira felt a sense of peace. The colony was thriving, not just in strength, but in spirit. And as she looked out over the busy trails and chambers, she knew that her journey, their journey, was only beginning. The moral of Kira's story spread far and wide. Kindness is not weakness. It is the foundation of true strength, capable of transforming even the most rigid hearts and the harshest worlds. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need a reminder of the power of kindness. Don't forget to follow us for more inspiring tales of hope and resilience. Together we can spread the message that even the smallest acts of compassion can make the biggest difference.